From a defabricated solar-powered garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA, this is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, the top 10 reasons you should probably not drink Head and Shoulders. And now, the podcast host who has no worries for such things because his bald head does not have dandruff, Pete Dominic!
That's right, sir. No dandruff here. Although I do understand why anybody would want to drink shampoo. It looks so creamy and delicious. Hello, folks. Welcome to another episode of Stand Up here Monday through Saturday and even sometimes more. Check me out on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and all of the things because you've got to be everywhere if you're going to be doing this. So please follow me on those other platforms if you are on them. If you're not, God bless you. Good for you. Thank you for pressing play on the podcast. You will not be sorry because guess who's back? The great Dr. Aaron Carroll joins me to talk about his big New York Times piece comparing our healthcare system with the rest of the world, saying we got to get more creative. It's a great piece. We have a great conversation, and in addition to Dr. Aaron Carroll, for the first time on the show, I finally got somebody to talk about cybersecurity. Jeff Baker of Socium joins me to talk about what you can do to protect yourself from bads, the baddies, the bad people who will do everything they can to take your hard-earned savings, money, identity, and whatever else. Dr. Aaron Carroll, Jeff Baker, both join me here on today's episode of Stand Up. Can't do it without your subscription, so sign up now at standupwithpete.com. Oh, man, what a day it was yesterday. The news, of course, dominated by the circus, headed into Miami, that being President Trump and his cult following joining him, although not that many of them wearing MAGA hats and convict stripes, and apparently there was a dead pig somewhere. President Trump greeted his arraignment with the showmanship and a bid to kind of upstage charges. Apparently, he was scowling. He hunched his shoulders, barely opened his mouth in court. Some of his rivals have started to turn critical. We'll see how long they stay critical. Yesterday, television went wall to wall, and MSNBC was the first time it was number one in prime time for like 2 years, apparently. So Tucker Carlson is gone, and everybody else is trying to take advantage of that as long as they can until Fox News hires Thanos or Magneto or the ghost of Hitler or whatever they're going to do. So you never thought you would see it, but it said on the TV screens and headlines everywhere, Trump has been arrested. Former President Trump arrested. It's crazy, but he surrendered to authorities and pled not guilty. Of course, not guilty to 37 felony charges that he mishandled top secret classified information and obstructed justice after leaving the White House. In additional news for him and the world, a federal judge will allow E. Jean Carroll to amend her original defamation lawsuit against Trump to include comments he made at a CNN town hall, so it could get worse for him on that case. In other news, and big news that affects everybody, this is great, inflation fell to 4% in May from a year earlier. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy struck a temporary deal with his 11 insurgents in the Republican Freedom Caucus to end their protest that prevented the House from considering any business for almost a week. And they got busy passing legislation that is unnecessary about a completely manufactured issue. They passed the bill to block a federal gas stove ban, something that wasn't even going to happen. And the Senate isn't even going to take a look at this, much less pass it, so it was all for show. I'm not going to spend a whole bunch of time right here analyzing what happened with President Trump yesterday, because I'm sure you've seen a lot of it, but I did see this one piece, which I thought was interesting. Fresh off his second arraignment since April, Donald Trump Tuesday night tried to explain why he allegedly kept classified documents after leaving office in a major speech that he gave. But in doing so, apparently he admitted to one of several charges that he faces. According to FBI General Counsel and MSNBC legal analyst Andrew Weissman, the president, speaking from his Bedminster, New Jersey golf club, insisted he had, quote, every right to have those documents. Here is Weissman talking to the great Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC late last night.
Former prosecutor Andrew Weissman was taking notes while the defendant was speaking, offering us publicly his defense about having those documents, why he took them, the motivation. That was written in the teleprompter. His lawyers probably knew that he was going to be saying this tonight. He didn't just, wing it. That was a considered choice.
So the word defense needs to be in air quotes when you're talking about that. So one thing that's important for everyone to know is those statements that you just played are admissible as admissions, regardless of whether Donald Trump takes a stand or not. Those are admissions. So that is part of what he said is just a straight out confession. It's not a defense, it's a confession. Part is a legal argument that is just not the law. So the jury will be instructed, and it will not be about the Presidential Records Act. As he says, it's a civil case. He's not charged in a civil case. He's charged in a criminal case, which is why, upon conviction, people go to jail. And the I did not know what was in the boxes is disproved by his own voice on tape, where he talks about two of the documents. It is disproved by contemporaneous texts by his employees talking about his being maniacal about no one having a possession of these boxes but him, and his going through the boxes himself. And finally, none of this addresses the obstruction of justice, because even if you agreed with every single thing he said, it is still not a defense to when you get a grand jury subpoena, you need to comply. And instead, there will be a lawyer who will take the stand, and it may be 3 lawyers, to say he wanted me to lie to the Department of Justice and say we returned everything, which, by the way, is exactly what the certification that was false said. So I am confident his lawyers, if they're all good, are listening to this going, how much worse are you going to make this criminal case for you?
Yeah, not good. Very not good for President Trump, for his future lawyers. I guess he can't even find anybody to hire him. Maybe it's because his reputation is that he doesn't pay people. So if even you wanted to sell your soul to Donald Trump, you don't, because he probably isn't going to pay you. We'll see who steps up to represent him. Somebody is going to. But saying that he could take these documents in a speech after he was arrested for taking those documents and not returning them, not good. Not good. We're not going to have a country anymore, folks. Not good. Okay, sorry. Well, I'm sure you're caught up on all things Trump and the indictment and the arrest. If not, hopefully you are a little bit more now. But I'm going to move on to my conversations, my interviews now, because, hey, I had a late night. I went to the Mets-Yankees game with my friend Dr. Zatz. We had a great time, so not as much time today. Blame Zatz, as most days, to cover the news, but that's okay because I got 2 great guests joining me today. So let's do it and get to them right now. Coming up, Jeff Baker on cybersecurity, what you need to know to protect yourself and your family and your home from hackers, scammers, schemers, and the bad people out there. But first, it's been way too long since we talked to one of the smartest people in the world, according to me. I like to think most of the guests I have here are the smartest people in the world, but that's what I like to think, at least. He's a pediatrician, professor of pediatrics at Indiana University School of Medicine, now also the chief health officer at IU. He's got a hit YouTube channel, which has won journalism awards. If you haven't subscribed to Healthcare Triage, well, you are missing out, my friends. I watch almost all of them. I binge them. I love them. Really, really great. Now it's a podcast as well, Healthcare Triage. Of course, you can follow him on Twitter. He doesn't tweet as much anymore, but we still love when he does, at Aaron E. Carroll. And you should all go read his New York Times piece that he's just put out yesterday that we spent most of this interview on discussing. It's titled, I Studied 5 Countries' Healthcare Systems. We Need to Get More Creative with Ours. Aaron went all over the country over the past few years. Aaron went all over the world over the past few years, from Singapore to New Zealand and so much more. He talks to us all about it right now. I'm so happy to have him back. I know you will be as well. This is a great and important conversation. We haven't been talking about healthcare, but we certainly need to be talking about our broken healthcare system. So let's do that right now with Dr. Aaron E. Carroll.
There he is, Mr. Indiana, Mr. New York Times, Mr. World Traveler, Aaron Carroll.
Doctor to you, excuse me.
Oh, forgive me, sir. You're still a doctor. You're still...
Of course I don't care. That was just Mr.
No, I think it's true. I think that you should tell people that behind the scenes, you actually corrected me in a text, which I thought was really surprising.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Doctor, please, in a text.
Yes.
So, wow, great piece. I want to talk with you about it. I've just told folks a little bit about it, but tell me a little bit about these trips. I knew you're taking them, and I knew they came from different grants, right? And they were a little bit of a mixed match. But the bottom line was you went to these different countries and you studied their healthcare systems. I thought you were just like drinking whiskey by the pool.
No. In fact, they're much less whiskey than usual because that's not really the focus of many of these countries' alcohol. That just didn't come out right.
Oh.
I guess what I was trying to say is that they're not as into whiskey, all these countries, as we might be.
Well, what did you go to? I feel like one of them, at least, maybe Singapore, doesn't allow alcohol, or not?
No, Singapore has alcohol.
Oh.
In fact, there were lots of bars and stuff in Singapore.
I just made that up.
But, yeah, it's not a lot of chewing, but definitely they still have. So I mean, every year, I'm lucky enough that as part of the Kelly School of Business, which is part of IU. Has a program called the Business and Medicine Program. It's an MBA program for MDs. I give a lecture or two in there, and I talk about international healthcare systems. But as part of their learning, they offer a course where in February you go to visit two countries' healthcare systems. So in the past, we've been to Singapore and Malaysia. Last year, we went to Switzerland. Not last year, but before the pandemic, we went to Switzerland and the Netherlands. And then this year we went to the UK and to France. And so I was thinking, trying to think I really want to pick up a larger thing to talk about with respect to, what I'm learning from these trips. But then I got offered an opportunity to travel with Academy Health and the Commonwealth Fund to go back to Singapore and to also go to Australia and New Zealand. So been a lot of traveling this year. But they're very different healthcare systems, and I really wanted to try to think about what take-home message could you learn from this? How could we have a more productive conversation about healthcare? And I really became convinced that we're arguing about the wrong things. And so this was a great opportunity to sort of take all of that together. These amazing opportunities that I had to learn about other countries' healthcare systems, and to talk about what we as a country could learn from them.
You say we need to get more creative with our system after studying those 5. And the bottom line is you taught us years ago when we talked about this issue pretty much every week and every day in the media. It was a discussion during the argument over the Affordable Care Act, healthcare reform, that there are 3 pillars to the stool of healthcare. There is access. Can you even get a doctor's appointment? Can you even get care? There's affordability. If you get in that doctor's office, can you afford to pay whatever the bill is? And finally, if you got a doctor's appointment and you could pay for it, was it any good? So Quality, access, affordability or cost, and quality. Those are the 3 pillars. How am I doing, Professor? Doctor?
You're doing great. You're doing great. But, the problem is that we've been arguing about the same thing for decades. And that's just basically it's really access, although you could argue a little bit, because it's insurance. Like, how do we get people covered? And we've solved very little in those decades. We still don't have universal coverage. And that's what we argue about. And for every other country, that's the easiest thing. They've gotten to universal coverage. What I've really learned is that they get there in different ways, and it doesn't matter. Like, no one else, when you travel to their country, do they really spend a huge amount of time debating or talking about, should we change up how we give insurance? They're like, if they figured out a reasonably simple means to do so, and they just do it. And it doesn't matter whether it's a fully socialized system or a single payer system or tightly regulated private insurance or massive dependence on personal savings and health savings accounts. Like, that's the least important part of it. And that's what we spend all our time arguing about.
Yes.
And the fact that they've figured out some relatively easy way to get to universal coverage allows them to focus on the stuff that actually matters, which is, quality, the providing of health services. We don't ever talk about that and what that might do to improve our health system.
Well, a lot of people, one of the arguments is, we have access, we have emergency care. We're not even going to go there. Let's just talk about insurance because that's not health care. That's my legs falling off. My stomach is exploding. That's not health care. That's not what we're talking about.
But that's also one of the things I think it's important to focus on is like, that's what we think of as healthcare. That's not what other countries think of as healthcare. You know what? I've been to Singapore now twice to learn about their healthcare system. And twice I've been subjected to like a half day focused on housing. And you might go, well, why housing? And it's like, if you come to Singapore and you're like, I want to learn about why your healthcare system works well, they talk about housing because it's a social determinant of health. And if you give people the stuff that matters, like housing and food security and education, it turns out they also are much healthier. And Singapore has a ridiculous housing system, which is amazing. I think 80% of people in Singapore live in public housing.
Wow.
And 90% of all people in Singapore own their home, including public housing. It's massive. And it's like that levels a playing field where, if you invest in those kinds of things, Singapore spends 5% of their GDP on what we would consider the healthcare system because their people are healthier. And if you go to Australia, when we were in Australia, you talk to people in Australia, and you're like, why do you have such good outcomes? And they're like, oh, it's not the healthcare system. It's like our healthcare system is good, but it's just as good as everyone else's, excepting the United States. It's that we also invest in things like food security and, things that are we would consider to be more safety net or public health. That's what they think leads to better outcomes. And we don't even consider that healthcare. We consider healthcare what you get when you're already really sick. And that stuff turns out it's not nearly as cost effective.
I feel like next you're going to tell me a country you visited where they look at one measure to spend or increase better healthcare outcomes by investing in education or something like that. Because you said housing, you said food security, and
education's there too. It's it's just there are things that matter so much for health. We don't consider those things healthcare. We consider healthcare only really the stuff you get when you're sick, or at very last stage, maybe trying to catch or prevent stuff that makes you really sick. But we don't invest nearly enough in all of the stuff that makes you well or keeps you well.
And we still don't have a very good conversation about it, most of us. But let's stick with insurance and access for one more minute, because I think to me, I recently heard America's original insurance sin is connecting insurance to your employer, because it's
Hold on one sec. Loki's scratching at this door and he's not going to let me rest.
Come on in, Loki. Join us. Loki.
He's trying to get out.
Lee, is it me?
Don't worry, he'll be back.
Loki, I'm sorry. Loki hates talking about health insurance.
He thinks there's other people out there he might want to see, and he's going to realize there's not.
Loki's about to be disappointed. Much like the American health insurance consumer. I don't care. Loki can't get me off track on this issue. Employer, you have to have a job, and your job provides you with insurance. That's pretty unique, and it's really terrible and super depressing.
Yeah, we are, in fact, we may be the only system I can think of that has such a huge employer-based healthcare system where it's tied completely to your job. Even other countries that rely heavily on private insurance, like take Switzerland, it's totally uncoupled from your job. You could have the same health insurance from birth to death. It has nothing to do with where you're employed. That's no one defends that as a good idea. It's just a trick of World War II and IRS policy for why we have that system. It's silly.
But the thing to me that's really the hardest thing to overcome is that we have this system, and you can't just redo it overnight. Specifically, employers argue, well, this is a benefit. We give our employees, we give them better health insurance from the super insurance agency, and they do health insurance better. And there's millions and millions of dollars in private health insurance. Everybody knows the names of these companies. And there's millions of Americans working in those companies. You can't just get rid of them, sir.
So don't. This is like, again, I think the point of the piece, I'm like, just stop arguing with that. This is stupid. Like, the idea that because we can't change insurance, we can't change the system, misses all the things that we could do that have nothing to do with insurance. Like, I actually think the biggest difference between all of these other countries and us is that they have public delivery systems. They have, government-run hospitals that provide good care at, rock bottom prices. And if you don't need to compete and you don't need to build it up with all of these kinds of amenities, you can get reasonably good health care to people for much less money. And it's those public delivery systems which matter, not the publicly delivered insurance. Every one of them, most people get care in a public facility. Now, they also all have private systems you can absolutely pay for if you want, and they're fancy, and they have better food, and you get definitely better service, and you get what you want faster. And some people choose to pay the extra money or pay for extra insurance to go use that private system. And government's fine with that. It's like, we're going to provide a public system, which relatively cost effective and reasonably cheap. And then there's this private system if you want to pay for it. That is something actually Canada does not do. And that's, I don't know why we only compare ourselves to Canada. All these other countries have mostly public system with a private, release valve. That seems to work really well. But in the United States, it's the opposite. Almost everybody gets their care in a private hospital. Some of it is nonprofit, some of it is profit, but it's all competing for revenue. It's all competing, with amenities and trying to be super fancy. And it winds up raising the prices, and we all pay more.
Can you?
And I think that's the big difference. We could do that without revamping the system. We could try to invest more in public hospitals. We could lean in that direction. We could explicitly accept the tiering that all of these other countries do, where it's like most people get, good, basic, not fancy care that actually works. And if you want to pay more, great. But we sort of resist that tiering in a weird way, which means that sort of everyone sort of, gets the same, and we're paying for the wrong stuff.
So your answer to the private insurance or the access issue is better delivery. So you sound like a real socialist. You want the state hospital, the public hospital, the socialist hospital. That's what you're suggesting we do here.
I think that we could achieve more for less if we allowed, for more public hospitals, and then still maintain. I have no problem. We have a private release. People want to get more and they want to pay for it out of their own pocket. Go, feel free. Like, I don't care. And these other countries don't care. Like, they're like, go ahead, spend more if you want to get it, what you want faster, or, to have fancy food, or, boutique service, or whatever else is going on. Feel free. But, we're also going to provide over here, really good basic care, without any of those amenities or any of the fanciness. And I actually think that would lead to better outcomes. And I think it's what most other countries do, that we're lacking. But again, we're so focused on how the insurance is going to work. We don't ever talk about the delivery. And we also, we could invest in better policies, take care of those social determinants of health. Like, you could do that at state level. You could do it. You could have better housing. You could have better food security. You could have better education. You could have, we can fix disparities and racial inequities. All of these things matter too. That does not require a revamping of the entire system. We could just choose to recognize that these things matter too. Somehow, though, we've gotten into a blind alley where the only debate we have about healthcare reform is how do we get people insurance and how do we pay for it? That's the easiest part. That's the stuff that every other country's done already. Like, they're like, oh, that's just pushing money around.
Right.
We got that. And I don't even care anymore how we do it. I don't care if it's single payer. I don't care if it's, we have a total private insurance system like Switzerland. I don't care if we go, more health savings accounts and personal stuff I don't care. I just don't. I just wish we could get past that and then start focusing on the stuff that actually matters.
So I don't know how we got in that blind alley, much less how we're going to get out. But I think most important point that you make, and you've made this for years, is we spend about 18% of GDP on healthcare. That's almost $12,000 per American, you're right.
Per person.
It's about twice what other countries currently spend.
That's the irony, is that when you go to these other countries and you look, they all are perfect. They all have issues. Sometimes it's wait times. They recognize they have an aging population like we do. There's new technology and it costs a lot of money and they're worried about it. So they fret about many of the same things we do, even though they're doing so much better. But when you say to them, like, well, how could you overcome this problem? They're like, oh, we could spend more money. That's what would solve it. Why do they, if they want to solve their wait time problem, they could just spend more money. How do you, get more technology? Oh, you just spend more money. They just won't, because they're like, we just can't. And because there's no political will, or because the money's being spent on something else. But, most countries spend about 8 to 10% of GDP on their healthcare, which, again, that's a percentage of GDP, since we have the largest GDP. And we're spending 18%. We spend more than twice in terms of like dollars what any other country spends per person. If they spent that much money, no problems. But again, it's like but it's weird to me, because like that's what would solve it. They just won't do it, and so they live with things not being as good as they could. So the thing that they think is easy, which is figuring out how you're just going to cover everybody, we can't seem to wrap our head around and get done. And the thing that they say is impossible, we're already doing. So if we're willing to spend that much money, let's just spend it better. Make better choices. Like, we've already done the hard part. Let's just, and fine, everybody wants to spend that much money and make this an enormous jobs program, and people will make, I don't care. Fine, we're doing it. We can keep doing it. We can keep blowing $4.4 trillion a year on this, but we could certainly spend it better.
How much of that money do you think is kind of wasted in terms of the interests of the very few? And by that, I mean investors and executives.
The problem is that, it's when we say waste, it's not money that they put in a field and light on fire. It's revenue. It's people's incomes. It's, 18% of GDP means it's 18% of our economy, is healthcare. That's lots of people's jobs. That's their income. That's their insurance. That's what they make. So we can't just it's not like we can just say, oh, let's just stop spending it. That would literally cause a depression. If we reduce spending that much, by definition, if you drop GDP a couple of points, that's how you get into a depression. So I don't even argue anymore about let's, spend so much less. Fine, we're spending it. But we could use that money for better things.
What I mean, though, not as just your rank and file employee at a hospital or a doctor's office. I mean the executive pay and the shareholder price of hospital systems, publicly owned hospital systems, much less, insurance companies, because it would seem that that's where some efficiencies or some capital that you could be using
There's some, but that's actually my point. Is it's probably still remember. People all the time are like, oh, drugs cost too much. Drugs are why we spend so much in the United States. It's all the high price of drugs. It's those greedy pharmaceutical companies. What do we spend on pharmaceuticals a year in the United States? A couple $100 billion? Let's say $400 billion. Let's make it really high. I just said we spend $4.4 trillion on healthcare. If we literally said drugs for the next year are free, 100% free, no profit, no nothing for any pharmaceutical companies, we would still be spending $4 trillion on healthcare, more than every other country in the world. It's all of these things we think of as waste are tiny components of the spending, because the spending is healthcare. We spend it on healthcare. It's not like there's $2 trillion of administrative waste, or $2 trillion of greedy executives, or even shareholder benefits. It's if we zero out any of these things that we think of as the cause, we're still spending $4+ trillion on healthcare. It's the whole system that's expensive. Everything's expensive.
You talked about when you go to these other countries and study their healthcare systems, what do you actually do? You talked about the differences with, say, their hospitals, and, some of them are a lot better. They have better amenities. And then later on, I think you mentioned food and something else. I mean, where do hospitals spend money? How could they save money? Did you go into them and see them and talk to them?
I mean, so it's usually a mix of hearing from people that work in the, Ministry of Health or whatever the corresponding group would be in that country. Usually you talk to some hospital execs, you talk to insurance execs, you talk to, you hear from physicians, you tour the hospitals, you see a clinic, you learn about the public health system, you see how, some of the safety net programs work. Luckily, I mean, again, it's a privilege. When we do it with the Kelly School, they work with companies to set up itineraries and do this. And when it was the tour of Singapore, Australia, and New Zealand, again, it was working with a company that does healthcare tours who, sets up all of these meetings. And then, then you have dinners with people who come and speak to you, and they can be experts on, the system, or they could know about, they could be an economist or something. So you hear from experts, and you actually see how all the pieces work together. And there's something, to it, to actually seeing it all function, because it's just too easy, especially in the United States, to get stuck with American exceptionalism and just think, oh, well, ours is the best, and anywhere else you would just die if you get sick. And when you see other hospitals, they all look the same. They all look fancy and nice, and then there are some which are not, and clinics look like clinics, and there are ones you see where you're like, oh, that looks just like the place I work, even if it's a good place or a bad place. And you talk to people, and you see how the whole thing holds together. And you realize that, we imagine somehow that there's all this special technology and amazingness that happens in the United States that doesn't exist elsewhere. And of course it does. Cities look like cities. And in most of the countries you compare ourselves to, these systems work, and the doctors work. It's just that because of the way they're set up, they're able to keep prices down, and they refuse to some extent to spend as much money. And so the whole thing is just pressured a bit to cost less. And I think that they spend less. That shouldn't matter, but we make them, I would say, amenities. In Singapore, it's like literally when you go to a hospital, there's tiers of care. C level, there's like C1, C2 is like bare bones. You might be in a room with 10 people. You get whatever doctor's on that day. You share a bathroom. That's free. And then there's like A, B1, B2, B2 plus. And at each level, you're not getting fancier drugs or better procedures. You're just getting, maybe you'll share a room with one person. Maybe you have a private room. Maybe it'll be air conditioning. Maybe, the doctor you'll pick, and they'll come to see you 3 times a day, and you'll have air conditioning, and you'll, get your procedure sooner than you would. But that stuff doesn't matter as much in terms of outcomes. But if you want to pay for it, go ahead. In the United States, we bundled that all together. And so that's like your only option. Like even when we build new hospitals, it's all single rooms. It's all, they're all competing with new menus and fancy food. And, and all that costs a huge amount of money.
I wonder if any of them have the Apple goggles available to patients.
Will. Someone will, believe me. It'll be like in the fancy, the fancy room somewhere.
Doesn't this though all come back to, or isn't the problem, at least in this country, the way that our politics work, the way that government works, specifically the way that special interests spend money. So if you have that big pool of money that we spend on healthcare, you've got the pharmaceutical companies, the hospitals, you've got the physicians' interests groups, you've got obviously the health insurance, and they're all going for those dollars, and they all get what they want a lot of the time because they pay for, they pay donations to congressmen.
Yeah, they do. And so it's like, I fully admit, I think gearing up for another federal, let's fix it all in one fell swoop ain't going to work. But,
right.
That the things that I have mentioned, more, increasing the number of public hospitals, like trying to, offer, more bare bones care that would be cheaper and let people choose could happen in a state. Choosing to create policies which would make people more likely to be well in general can be done in a state. Go ahead. Like you don't need the federal government necessarily to do. You could try. We could be inventive. We could be creative. We could try to solve some of these problems without, quote unquote, revamping the entire system.
But I feel like even if you did it piecemeal or one part of it, you would still have that same issue with special interest spending.
I mean, do you think that like there's no lobbyists in other countries? Like, you think that these are also economy where like they're not all like completely socialist. Like the drug companies make money in those other countries still. Hospitals, private hospital systems do exist and make money in those other countries. They're just not the only choice. And most people choose the public system because it's cheaper. And they, and it's cheaper to them, and they go with their pocketbooks. We don't have we rarely have that kind of choice. Like nobody says, I'm going to choose this hospital because it's cheap. Like that even doesn't really exist in the United States. We built a system where it's just, it's expensive no matter what you do. And it's baked into the cake.
I wanted to ask you a bunch of other questions before I found out about this New York Times piece, but time for just one, because you've been doing a lot of great stuff at Healthcare Triage. By the way, if I were to go deeper on any one of these issues that we talked about, I'd love to know more about who it is in America that is not covered with health insurance. I don't know if you're going to, at this point, who doesn't have access? Because my brother-in-law, who's makes very, very little money, just lost it in Michigan, and this 133% above the poverty rate does not seem to be necessarily working. So maybe for another time, because a
quick answer is, remember, there's not a Medicaid expansion in all the states. So if you're very poor and your Medicaid system is bad in a state that doesn't have a Medicaid expansion, the Affordable Care Act did not help you.
Right.
And also broadly, there are people still who even still can't feel like they can't afford it, even with the exchanges and the way they are.
Right.
And then, of course, there's undocumented immigrants who clearly don't get insurance through the Affordable Care Act. And then there are people who just, refuse to spend the money, and they exist as well. And altogether, that probably totals something like 10% of the population, and that's who's left.
You've been doing some great stuff over at Healthcare Triage around climate. And so I just have one question for you, just to clear it up, because a guy went on Fox News this week, one of these climate deniers named Malloy, and said that it's not hazardous to your health to be breathing in that wildfire smoke. I believe you did a specific video just about that issue.
Yeah, before this even. We had written that before. Pollution matters? We know that pollution matters. If you can see it, why would you think it doesn't matter? Now, is one day going to change your life? Probably for most people, no, or a couple days. But this is not going anywhere. And it happens, on the West Coast now. It feels like every year. And it's if it starts happening in the East Coast every year too, it's going to be more and more and more and more of a problem. And putting our head in the sand and pretending like this doesn't matter is silly.
I feel like we actually do regulate pollution a lot better than, say, certain countries. And so you could look at the data of certain countries, like I think China and India, and say, yes, because of the pollution, these people that they live with every day are not doing well. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, yes. And you can look at it even in the United States. We've absolutely made a difference. A lot of the stuff that we complained about, acid rain and, stuff that when we were younger was a big deal. Even the hole in the ozone.
We fixed it.
Done stuff that actually improves things.
Reagan regulated chlorofluorocarbons. Yeah,
that's what is mind-blowing. It's there was a problem. We actually made something better. It got better, and now we're pretending like it doesn't matter and that we can just slide. It's silly.
Thank you very much for joining me. It's been far too long. We appreciate you. We love you. You're one of our all-time favorites. We hope to talk to you soon again.
Anytime.
Well, there he goes, Dr. Aaron Carroll. How about it? Please go thank him. Go over there on Twitter, go contact him and let him know that you enjoyed having him back on the show and hearing him here. Always one of the best, great friend of mine, and I'm real excited to have him back on the show. So let him know. And now for the first time ever on the show, I've got to talk to somebody about cybersecurity and how to protect yourself and your family because, of course, we were unable to do that here. But you saved us when my daughter, Ava, I don't remember her name, when Ava was scammed for $5,000 a few weeks back. And so many of you found out about it and donated money to a GoFundMe that Pete Coe set up and replenished what she was lost. Most people don't have that, but most people don't have this amazing community that supports me and each other. So still really hard to wrap my head around how amazing that was. But it was horrible before that and really devastating for Ava. We still think a lot about it. We want to do everything we can as a result to protect you and others, which is why I got Jeff Baker to join me here on the show for the first time. Jeff is the Chief Information Officer and SVP of Operations at Socium Solutions, which works in management consulting, cybersecurity, data management. They have a great track record of success in building teams to protect you, your family, and your business. I was really happy to get Jeff to join me, and we'll be talking more about these issues. Go to sociumsolutionsllc.com to learn more about Jeff and their work. And let's do it right now for the first time with Jeff Baker. And by the way, sorry for all of my childish references to the word taint as a password, but come for the great information for Jeff and stay for my cringy references.
All right, so everybody knows about what happened to my daughter, and I've been wanting to talk to somebody who could help me understand the threats and what we can do to protect ourselves for a while, and I found Jeff Baker. And I've just told you all about him. Jeff, welcome to Stand Up for the first time. This must be nerve-wracking for you and your business to join me in conversation.
It truly is. Yeah, to have a conversation with another human is tough. I appreciate it.
Well, let's start there. The other human. I was wondering if you could tell me, in general, if there's any way to talk about the types of people who commit the types of crimes that you are trying to protect individuals, businesses, governments from. Like, who are these people? Because I always have this idea in my head that they're foreigners, and mainly because it's hard to catch them and even harder to prosecute them. I'm not trying to be, xenophobic or anything. But, in general, it could be anybody, anywhere, anytime.
It really could. And I think even the little image that is typically out there, the guy in the hoodie and the darkened face, kind of this creature in the dark is a little bit of a misnomer, too. It really can be the bored junior high kid or high school kid down the street. It could be someone who, for some reason, doesn't like you, has it in for you. It could be a foreign actor. It really could be anyone at any time. You just don't know.
When we talk, there's so many different threats that individuals face and that businesses, governments face. My feeling is that if you're a pro, you're going after the people and the places that have something. They're going after people with money or something to protect, which leaves a lot of, people, maybe they don't have to be as concerned. What would you say in terms of who the targets generally are or can be? Because it's obviously sometimes just random, too.
I think a lot of it is whoever's easiest. These guys tend to be a little bit lazy. Certainly if you're a big company and you've made someone mad, they're going to target you for the big payout. But more likely than not, they're just, casting a wide net and seeing what they catch. So if your defenses are down, that could be a physical defense at your house. It could be a network defense, or it could just be your, as a human, again, your interactions, you're maybe not on guard or on alert. They're going to see an opportunity. They're going to take it. You think of almost a pest control analogy for your house. It's not really about killing the bugs. It's more about pushing them away from your house into some space that's less protected. So if I've got better pest control than my neighbor, guess where the bugs are going to go? So it's not about the bugs don't like me. It's just easier to go next door. So
I understand.
Think of it in that.
I understand. You should have thought of maybe going into that line of work. It sounds like similar idea.
Kind of is, right?
So talk to us about our homes, our resident, for the individual, for the family. It's overwhelming, Jeff, to think about like how many devices I have that could be listening to me or watching me, or what I need to protect my family, our computers, our phones, our smart devices. And I'm generally on the spectrum where, I think I'm moderately concerned about things, which means I guess I put myself there, and I have an Alexa. I got one in my daughter's room, and I maybe I don't take all the precautions. I shouldn't say that into a microphone and record it, but I don't have a howitzer on my roof, but I do have a password on my modem. What are the things that most people in their homes, their residences should be concerned with and protect against?
Sure. I would say the first thing is, whoever gives you your internet connectivity, whoever your provider is, they're going to give you that device like you described that has a password on it. If you're able, change that password because they can be randomized, but they can be standard. What I do personally at my house, and it may be a little bit more sophisticated, but I've actually split my house into two networks, if you will. One that I work on for my business, and the other where all my devices play. So my TVs, my printers, my barbecue pit, all that kind of stuff. And if I'm in home mode, I'm on that home network. If I'm in business mode, I'm on business network. So the goal there, the idea there is to, if you compromise one, you don't necessarily get the other. So they're creating a little bit of a segment, if you will, or some firewalling in between those. But I think maybe more realistic for most folks is you don't have to crank your Wi-Fi up to full tilt where everyone 5 doors down the street can pick up your wireless signal. Keep in mind that almost everything that you buy today has some type of connectivity. Again, refrigerators, barbecue pits. So anything that makes life more convenient instantly raises some red flags for me. And I want to think about how I'm using that, the kind of password that I'm putting in. I don't want to use the same password everywhere. I don't want it to be my dog's name or my kid's name or my last name. I want to put a little bit of effort into it. Again, thinking back to these folks are lazy. So if I'm making it a little bit more challenging, they're going to go next door where there probably isn't a password.
Who's trying to get into my home network? Someone's in my neighbor who doesn't like me, maybe, which is the truth in my case, or someone's outside. They're one of these criminal characters that we're describing. They're sitting in their car and they're trying to get in. And what is your obsession with barbecue pits? Also,
it could be a neighbor. It could be it could be a kid next door that's bored and just wants to see what they can get away with.
Right.
For me, I think it's less likely that someone's going to pull up in front of your house and sit in the street with some big, antenna trying to pick up your signal. It could happen. It's more likely going to be, someone that's within proximity. So a neighbor and likely a kid in that scenario.
I think, yeah.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
I think that that's a really good place to start. I feel like the main, problem. Well, first of all, what do you think about the smart home devices and stuff? Do you have one of those? Do you allow for that in your home? Alexa, Google Home, the Apple's got one, I think.
So we have Alexa. My thoughts are when she's not in use, we unplug her and I'll plug her in and I'll play a playlist or music while we're getting ready in the morning or in the evening. And then I'm unplugging her at night when I'm done. I don't trust the technology is as up and up as it claims to be. So I'm a little bit suspicious of that. So it's an as needed, and all of our devices are like that, like Alexas and things like that. We have 3 or 4 in the house. They're all unplugged unless they're in use.
Well, that's weird. My wife and I only plug ours in when we're talking about our finances and PIN numbers. We probably shouldn't do that. I'm guessing based on your advice. I feel like the primary issue, at least, I'm talking about my daughter. I'm talking about when I told everybody what happened to my daughter, everybody, of course, told me what happened to them or their loved ones. I feel like it's phishing. It's the idea that bad actors are going to contact you, and they can contact you in several different ways. But I feel like the most common ones are through an email, through a text or a phone call, where somehow they convince people to give them their money. And to me, I feel like that's the business, at least for individuals, that we're seeing the most of these types of phishing schemes or scams, or what do you call them? And how, right am I about that being a big issue for folks?
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. And, it's amazing the information that some of these folks show up with without having ever met you. We have some property and I get texts probably 10 a week that are, hey, I see you've got this lot in, X, Y, and Z county. Would love to talk to you about buying it. How do you know that? Is that public record somewhere? And then even if it is, how are you ultimately then getting back to a cell phone number somewhere? So I think it really is, they're preying upon your trust, your willingness to be helpful, your desire to be helpful. They're catching you in an environment that your guard is down. You're not really expecting to be, jumped, if you will.
Yeah.
And so I don't think people are doing it or giving up the information willingly. I think they truly are just trying to be human and interact with another person. And unfortunately, they're giving it, too much away too often.
But once they hook you, then you start giving away information willingly because you think they are, in this case, protecting you or providing you with a great investment advice or, they get
fixing
you.
A password or some kind of issue is, your Amazon account's been compromised. Right. You're like, oh, goodness, I've got to fix that because that's important. Well, yeah, Amazon's not going to call you and tell you that, right?
So is there any advice then, whether it be things that people should just know or apps or tools, resources that we should have to protect ourselves and our loved ones who, for whatever reason, might be more vulnerable?
I struggle with this one even at home because not everyone is as security conscious as I am, even in my own household. But the one thing that I've been real adamant about is some kind of password vault or a password keeper. And there's a ton of solutions out there, but something, get your passwords off of a spreadsheet, don't write them down. And more importantly, make them complex and make them different. So
is it weird that mine is my current background on our chat right now? Just a bunch of passwords. I probably should take them off the background. I make that joke, but I only said it because I definitely have them on note cards and Post-its and everywhere.
Sure. And if I think about social media and if I, really started, putting a spotlight on you and started looking for maybe your Facebook or Instagram or wherever you participate in social media, I could probably fairly quickly figure out, a wife or a spouse or a child or a pet or a vacation. And you somewhere in there, maybe a birthday, somewhere in there, you're probably thinking right now, are some of these things that I'm using as part of a password. So you're giving me some of the information already without intending to. So if I know who you are, I know where you're kind of playing, and maybe I go after a Facebook account, put in the last place you visited and the year you visited, and maybe I'm starting to hack away at a password. So again, you're not intentionally putting it out there, but you might be leaving some breadcrumbs for someone who's.
You may be right. My password may also be an old password, something like my sexual proclivities, like one hashtag just the taint one. Okay, no one's guessing that. Oh, wait, if they see my internet history, I see what you're saying here, Jeff. Yeah, people really look in and find any of your secrets, and then they can use that against you.
Yeah, so as we all have this, and think even in the workplace, the same type of thing where we're kind of publishing ourselves, we're putting ourselves out there. We want the notoriety, or we're trying to grow our business, or whatever it may be. You could unintentionally be putting some information out there for the world to see, and the wrong person gets it and could certainly turn it against you.
Do you have any things that you say that people just have to know? I wish I would have at some point told my daughter, no law enforcement agency is ever going to contact you and demand money. That's not how law enforcement works at any level, local, state, federal. In the United States of America, they don't do that. The IRS doesn't contact you and say, you owe us money. You get letters. You get tons of correspondence. There's no phone calls from any law enforcement agency saying, as they did to my daughter, someone has stolen your identity and we are the U.S. whatever agency and we need to protect your bank accounts. So move them over here. No law enforcement agency is ever going to do anything like that. That's what I wish I would have told my daughter. What would you add or what would you say?
Yeah, I would extend that to banks, credit cards, really anyone that would have your information. They're especially not going to call you and have you, could you tell us your social so I can validate against what I have? Things like that where they're prompting you to provide the whole thing. The few times that I have been contacted by maybe a fraud department for a credit card, they're usually asking me to verify the last four of a card and they're giving it to me. They're not asking me to give it to them. There's always the gut feeling. If it doesn't feel right, if it feels weird, if it just, you're not quite sure, you can hang up the phone. You can request to call them back. You can go Google the service that is claiming to call you. They'll have a posted number, call back in directly and say, or ask for a case number and say, let me call back in and reference a case number. There's a lot of ways that you can handle it. Typically, like you said, they're not going to call you. There's going to be documentation via email, via mail, snail mail. They want to put it in writing. And then you've got to use some of that common sense or that gut instinct that just says, this isn't right. This doesn't. And think again about these tactics, just the way we sell things. there's pressure, there's urgency, there's a crisis, there's something there's some kind of pain that needs to be addressed. And how do we address it? Well, let me help you. So there's this, I'm a good guy trying to help you here. Those are all these little clues for, hey, something's not quite right here. Let me hang up the phone. Right. Let me step away from this, take a breath, pause, and then let me initiate a conversation with so said vendor and see if I get the same kind of answer from them.
Yeah, or I guess the same thing with an email. Let me email you back. I've gotten your email. Let me email you back.
Or go to the company. Even more importantly there, I would say go to the company themselves, Google the site for the company and email a contact address. Because if they're emailing you, you could be replying to a fake email address.
Jeff, how are these scammers now using AI? I've heard anecdotally, which means it must be happening every day, all day, that they're now using the voices of your loved ones. Sometimes they say, so-and-so has been arrested and, you need to come pick them up or bail them out or something like that. And then they have the voice now, apparently, of your loved one. Someone told me a great idea for that is have there be a safe word. So if that ever happens, you can say to the scammer, all right, just tell my loved one to tell me the safe word so I know that this is true. And of course, ours is taint, which my family is not fond of. No, they turned it down. No, but seriously, though, the safe word idea and the AI idea, what's happening?
Yeah, and another safe word alternative could be, asking them to, some detail that only you and the other person might know. It could be like a doll's name or something as a kid, something from the past that only that person would know. But certainly the advancement of AI is as helpful as it is a little bit scary. Deep fakes, like you're describing, whether it's a visual experience or an audio experience. And then, some of the telltale signs in the past of scammers, especially in email, have been, poor grammar and choppy words and sentences that don't really make sense. Well, now you can put into an AI engine, craft a letter that says these things and it spits out, high level grammar, high level English. So it's getting harder and harder to quickly throw these things out. So again, I think that's where that human element has to come in. Take a step back, think about it. Is this the type of thing that this vendor, this bank, this credit card, this retail service would come at me about? And even if you think it might be, there's nothing ever wrong with stepping out of that conversation and initiating it on your own, to be sure. We tell that with a lot of our clients in the business world because they're getting hit with this all the time. Stop the conversation, insert a human step in this, make a phone call someone on the other side and see if this is real before you, especially if there's money changing hands. We've had experiences where, someone showed up to close on a house and the title company said the money's not here. And they said, what are you talking about? I funded on the routing number that you gave me and the account that you gave me. And they go back and look and someone inserted themselves in an email thread, changed a couple of numbers, deposit went somewhere else. So guy shows up to close. There's no money in the title company's bank account and someone else has it free and clear weeks earlier. So it can happen anywhere. So you've got to stay alert, initiate. I mean, that's my thing. If I'm not sure, I'm ending it and I'm making the call.
So the other thing about AI is you mentioned deep fakes, and I was talking about loved ones' voices. We've all gotten those emails that we know are a scam because it's poor English and they've getting things wrong and it's just poorly formatted. But my understanding is now AI is allowing scammers to improve the email base and to make things look way realer and spread that far and wide.
Yeah, 100% agree. That's what I was saying. I think that's making it certainly harder to discern on the written side of things because it was, very easy to read, the crown prince of wherever, just inherited $1 million or $100 million wants to give you some choppy note. So again, thinking about the context of, is this the type of thing that my bank, does my bank even email me? Do they even have my email address? Or am I on, a snail mail monthly statement so they don't contact me? Just thinking about, is this information they would have? Is this the way they contact me? If you're not sure, again, you initiate the conversation. You go call the bank. You go call the agency. You go call the police department, whoever it is, and say, are you calling me about this? And, you start the conversation fresh from your side.
So the other big issue, and I know you've dealt with this with your government and private clients, is ransomware, Jeff. The idea that bad actors can take over your whole computer system, demand any amount of money they want to get it back. I mean, we've seen this in small towns in America. So the municipality of some small town in Vermont, I feel like I read about, was locked down by some, cyber criminal. And obviously they do that. They do this to businesses all the time, no matter big or small. So you have to have huge cyber crime prevention departments in your businesses and obviously in your towns. It costs a lot of money. I mean, guys like you make a living do this now, which is important. But how, what about that issue and what's changed with that? That to me is one of the scariest things, that someone could come in and take all of my stuff, all of my files, just paralyze me from being able to even work unless I give them money. I can't imagine that, but I've heard it's happening all the time.
And I would even go a step further with it. And it's likely that if you do pay, a couple of things could happen. A, you may not get your information back if they truly are just malicious and aren't, a good bad guy, if you will. There are bad guys that just, it's funny for them. It's fun, whatever. The other thing is, if you do pay, your information's out there on the dark web. So they're telling everyone not only who you are, but how they attacked you, how they took over, the amount that they ransomed, and whether or not you paid. So as soon as you pay, you're on a list, and it's likely that you're going to get hit again and again and again.
Wow.
I think that, some ways for small business, for individuals, there's a few things that really anyone should do. Don't trust the internet provider's equipment. I would, at a minimum, get something from, an electronics store, or if you can get low grade commercial stuff, some kind of firewall. Put something between the internet provider's device and the internet and your house. Put something in there, some kind of firewall, to be able to back your information up, whether it's offline onto a computer, into the cloud. There's a myriad of options there, and then keep those passwords up to date. Change them frequently, but make them complex. So again, it's not 100% foolproof plan, but if you're changing passwords or making them complex, you've got some backups. And you're making it a little bit harder for someone to get into your environment with some kind of firewall type device. Right. You've at least made it a little bit more difficult, and maybe the next guy's not as challenging, and they go beat up on them. But it is, So that, in lieu of the comment about having these massive departments, there are some things that you can do in effect, even as an individual or a small business.
What else that I haven't asked, Jeff, do people need to know and be aware of, whether they're individuals or businesses, that you're most concerned about? I mean, the bottom line to me always seems like we're never going to be able to keep up with criminal. By the way, that's true of all crime in the history of humanity, probably. We're always going to be trying to catch up and prevent against it. It's just so much more frustrating when it's technology based. So what else?
It is. I mean, I think there needs to be some cadence of assessing your environment. And this is probably more oriented towards a business. So it doesn't necessarily have to be every year, but year and a half, 2 years. Have someone third party come in, take a look. Even if you have your own IT or security department, have other eyes come in and take a look and ask the questions and poke around and get their perspective. How does the environment look? Is it holding up? I think about email security. There are some tools out there that you can put on top of your email that help control some of the phishing or limit damage if a phishing email were to hit. I fish my own family. There are opportunities for some user awareness training. If you have the ability to fish your company, fish your organization, and teach them what to look for. Like I said, I have a young child that's starting to get on devices. He's not. He's part of the fishing pool. He gets fished, and if he clicks on the wrong thing, we have a conversation like, were you not paying attention? Were you distracted? Why'd you click it? So I'm already kind of training him.
Barbecue for this kid.
For sure.
Wow.
And then I think as a business, the new frontier of this, there's some push from insurance companies. You're starting to see other businesses think about this. I can spend all the money in the world, fortify my own shop, but what about the people, the businesses that I interact with?
Right.
How do I know that they're not introducing risk to me? So we're also trying to build programs to help assess third parties that may interact with our clients. And that's where we've had that happen time and time again, where maybe a small mom and pop had an email compromise, some bad guy took over, and then they came in and inserted themselves again on an email thread and was able to get money out of our client. Our client was never hacked, was never ransomed, but money still left the organization.
Jeff, so much more to learn and talk about. You're going to have to be our future cyber criminal not cyber criminal prevention. What do you call yourself, Jeff? You're a security consultant.
Security consultant, I think, is fair.
All right, you're gonna be the stand-up security consultant. We'll go to you, and folks can contact you, and I'll give all that information out. It's of course in the show notes and sociumsolutionsllc.com. Great to have you on here. A lot more to talk about as these things come up. Let me know so we can try to get informed and get ahead of them ourselves.
You got it. Thank you, Pete. It's been a pleasure.
All right, there you go. Jeff Baker, Socium Solutions, security and its solutions, everybody. That was very informative. I look forward to talking with Jeff more and taking your questions for him. Maybe invite him to a hangout. We'll see. But that was awesome, and I appreciate you listening to today's show, especially thank you for Dr. Aaron Carroll for joining us to talk about his New York Times speech. Go watch that interview on YouTube. I posted the interview, youtube.com/standupwithpete now or anytime. Also on TikTok at Pete.Dominic. Can't do this show without your subscription. If you have not signed up, please do now. For those of you who have, thank you so much. You can always pay more if you're getting more, and I just can't thank you enough. It's free, but it is not cheap. I do it each day for you, for me, and for each other to connect. Hopefully I'll see you at the Hangout. We'll talk more tomorrow night. If you're a subscriber, Thursday nights I host a Hangout anytime in the Discord chat platform. If you don't know how to get into that, there's instructions at the end of every daily email that you get. If you have any questions about Discord, we'd love to have you in there. You can also just email me, standupwithpete@gmail.com. That's it. That is all. The quote of the day from Michael Altshuler. The bad news is time flies. The good news is you're the pilot. Oh, I like that. Thanks, Michael Altshuler, whoever you are. I'll talk to you later, tomorrow. Bye-bye.
Start making sense and you stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up. Stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up. They had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. Alright, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.